Hello, Pete.
Hi, how's it going?
It is going good. So we met at GameholeCon in 2021. So,
Yeah.
so I signed up for this game called Chew. It was on a Saturday night. Uh, it was kind of clicking around. The guy who was running this, I didn't really recognize the name. It was getting late. I was exhausted. I was tired. Jeff Richardson from Chaosium, I never played RuneQuest, was running a game. I thought, man, should I just skip? I am tired. Not sure I want to do it. It's like, no, I'll just go ahead and do that. And so I drug myself over to the game of Chew, and I must say that was the highlight of my GameholeCon experience.
That's so great to hear. That game had a lot of fireworks.
Oh my goodness.
I felt bad because I had some people who I gamed with, because I had two games that were just like a raucous good time, if you will. And the second game I ran that was actually of my other, recent release, Rest in Pieces, I couldn't remember their game. And I felt so bad because it was like we were talking about how great the game was, like for the first couple of days. By the end of that weekend, it was just like I had so many games that were just ridiculous and funny and all over the place. And so I'm so thrilled, especially because by Saturday, sometimes you're burned out as a game master. So
yeah, I don't know how you did that. I don't know how you, because you brought it on with all the energy. Well, I assume all the energy. I guess I haven't seen you earlier than maybe you have more energy, earlier on, but I was pretty much toast. And I felt bad that I wasn't necessarily able to concentrate as heavily as I wanted to, but that was a great game.
That's wonderful to hear. I've been really lucky. It's funny because as a person, you publish games, and I've worked with a lot of game designers. So when you're hanging out with other people, you talk about stuff like the grind of, running games. And I've had friends who, like, oh, it's my first game and I have this one adventure and I run, it's 2 hours and I run it like 6 times a convention. You talk to that guy a year later and they're like, I hate this game, So I've been really fortunate that so far the games that I've made have been really fun. Even if you run them 100 times. And I'm really thankful because otherwise I don't want to be that person. Could you imagine? You spend so much money, you want to be positive and have energy and at a convention and run the games and look at what I did. Look at this cool thing. You should buy it. And then instead be like, but I kind of hate it.
Well, there was a game designer who I had an opportunity to game with after all these years. He's, one of the old school game designers. And I'm glad I got to play in his game, but I also realized after playing it, I never want to play more than one game with him. Like I played the one game and it's like, and I'm not gonna say I didn't have fun, but it's like, no, I mean, it's just like, but if I could hang out with you, Pete, that'd be a different story.
What was it about it? You think it was something, was it like generational? Was it like play style?
Oh,
it
definitely was
energy.
I'll just it was Jim Ward, and he definitely it's his vibe. It's the way he plays, it's the way he GMs. But of course his game is kind of wacky but deadly. Where I'd say this game, but Chew is obviously, we can talk about that, but it's definitely a kind of a wacky game, but it's not quite so, I don't say it's not deadly, but it's just a different.
It's hard to put your finger on when you try to describe it and people don't see the art and they don't know what you're talking about, because you kind of say everything. Like you throw the kitchen sink at them and then they're just staring at you and you're like, what's kind of is like that. It is kind of like that, but good,
Yeah, my son's looking at buying it. He's talking about a campaign. I'm like, well, I don't know that Chew is really a proper campaign. It's really about different set pieces, different things that you do, and those things do add up, but it's not like it's not like you're doing the like what was it with the Call of Cthulhu, one of those Horror on the Orient Express or whatever, where it goes on for a year. You're not necessarily clue to clue to clue. It's like it's more of episodic, and I imagine you can tie things together, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
Yeah, it's funny. That's one of the things I'm kind of working on right now, is that the game has long play, campaign style play, but we really look at like that in the context of Chew being like, I don't know, 3 stories, like 3 full sessions, right? And what I mean by that is like 3 one shots or something. You know,
Yeah.
people play differently, so that each one of those one shots could be, 3 sessions for them or 1 session, depending on hours or location. But we kind of see like 3 to 5 of those because it just feels like that's kind of where it would organically end. And maybe that's because of how the comics are paced, that the reason why something like that happens is it takes about 2 or 3 individual cases, which is kind of like the one shots, to kind of start building something in the background that's like a conspiracy.
Yeah.
And we definitely see that start happening after one game when it leads into another, because just like food puns, like the players just kind of pluck them out of the air when they already have these visual references on this,
Yeah.
the cork board of stuff that happened in the last campaign and the people they met, and then now weird stuff is happening that kind of has similar shades to it. But yeah, once you've kind of had a conspiracy or maybe even 2, it seems like it can only kind of keep building, so much. Not to mention that the dry erase cork board, that's what we call the cork board. It's like a dry erase board that has post-its all over it describing cases and connections and people, and the player characters. You run out of space. It starts at first that you just kind of keep sliding the stuff over to the left, which is supposed to cram it up, but it's part of why it's funny, right? It's like you just slide the case stuff from the last case over, and then draw more crazy lines all over the place. But yeah, I'm with you. What I'm getting at is trying to feel like there's a couple things like you saw in the game, maybe like resistance rolls, like when things go bad, I'm just like, you can resist, but I just told you how your fingers got shot off your hand. If you don't, your fingers have been shot off your hand.
Yeah.
Do I care about how the mechanics, like how much that costs for you to resist in a one shot more than I care about it over time?
Right.
Because like you said, I do think more people will play this as individual one shots than campaign. And if they play campaign, it won't be like a super lengthy campaign. This isn't, like you said, like the 26-week, campaign.
Yeah.
With the same characters. So I've been reeling some of those choices back, where I'm like, oh, that makes it a little more deadly, but I'd rather it be, you have that feel in the one shot than not, because most people's experience will probably be that. So
Yeah, I think with the one shots, definitely. I say most people. I know I just like to run, whatever I can to the limits. But I think the idea. But if you look, maybe we ought to, before we go too far, maybe I just give your elevator speech for what the comic is,
sure.
because I know I can't.
So basically with Chew, there was an avian. There's a bird. The bird flu went bad, like horribly bad. So it's kind of relatively similar to our modern times, but a few years back, and the bird flu killed over 100 million people. So that led to huge overreach and government controls, which basically led to like the Food and Drug Administration became like the most powerful law enforcement agency, followed by the USDA, because they made all poultry illegal. So there was a poultry prohibition. And for most people, that means all chicken and all eggs suddenly became legal. And this changed how crime kind of worked, as in like suddenly egg dealing became the thing, chicken trafficking, speakeasies came back for like chicken dining. So you could have like chicken and waffles or fried chicken, because it wasn't so long ago that we all remembered these foods, and like eggs are in everything. So this government overreach kind of becomes something that leads people to question, the ethics of the time. But you're a member of the FDA, who are kind of like the spooks of the time. You're above the law. So kind of some of the tongue-in-cheek stuff we're talking about that's funny is that you can really blame whoever you want to blame. Like, it's not a case sort of mission-oriented game where you have to get down to the ultimate culprit, because you just might be having a bad day and phoned it in. So the comics is where it came from. The comics are Chu. They follow a Chinese family, the Chu family, CHU in that case. And the rise of an investigator from the Philly PD through the FDA during this period of time, who's got a food power, because there are mutants that exist that have powers, kind of like the X-Men or something, but they're oddly specific and they're based on either eating or cooking things. So the lead character is one of the most powerful versions of these, which is whatever he eats, he can see the history of it. And this leads him to become a very successful investigator in the Times, because things like murder mysteries suddenly become a lot easier when you can take a little bite of a cadaver and find out who killed them,
But it
and maybe
also
even
makes his
why.
life, but it makes his life complicated
Oh yeah.
because eating meat is a horrific thing.
Yeah. So it starts off with some dark comedy in that like he can't eat a hamburger though, because then he sees how like the cow was butchered after he sees the cow have a happy life in the meadow or the pasture, but there's a lot of powers because of the times and the weirdness. Like they have unlimited budgets, so like the USDA has a robotics program, and but there's so much humor that comes out of something that seems so dark and tense, because like it's really funny when you can, like, your power is you can make mashed potato drones. Like I carry a little tub of mashed potatoes and I take that ice cream scooper, and when I throw them in the ground, they transform into little drones, and I tell them what to do. It's a weird, you have weird powers, and you have these abilities, and the times and the people and the things you're facing are all strange. So just so much funny, so much humor, not in you having to be funny, but you having to deal with funny situations.
Yeah, wasn't there some sort of alien form that, or fruit or something that
Oh yeah.
became, so it can get really far out there.
Yeah, they basically, the cool thing about the comics, there were 60 issues made by Image. They started in 2009, following the journey of Tony Chu. But some of the stuff that really made it big was that like Chu was the comic that like you go to a comic shop and be like, yeah, my partner or my friend's not really into comics. They don't like superheroes. So give something for them. And it became this alternative comic, alt comic of choice, that really gave it its like sort of evergreen comic nature, as like the comic that wasn't about superheroes, even though there's a little bit, especially as we go forward with the food powers. But the comics kind of have something for everyone, because like after the first few issues, when they realized they were going to like have more issues and people liked it and it was a hit, there's a lot of characters that keep getting introduced, and you see their interpersonal relationships build. Most characters have kind of a fatal flaw of something like pride or recklessness or duty that they take to the extreme, which means they walk into problems. Every issue felt like compact, like action packed, like you enjoyed it for its standalone nature, but then still was building an overarching thing in the background. But it wasn't brooding like so many things can be. Like you have to watch the next episode, you have to read the next comic because you like got to know what's happening next. This felt like, oh, that was amazing, I can't wait for the next issue. But it was like everything was its own story.
Yeah, and I
Which
think
felt
the other
very
thing
complete.
too is you're not necessarily going to guess what's going on. It's well written in a way that it's not predictable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that part in itself is that like the creators never pull their punches. So that's kind of where we're getting when I was talking earlier about like, maybe making the more deadly, was it had the Game of Thrones factor, like the Kirkman effect of you never knew if your favorite character was going to die in the next issue, because they didn't care. Like they were okay with, if it could be aliens, well, then it's effing aliens. And here they are. We're not
Yeah,
spending 10 issues to get to it. And then you're like, okay, well, you just took the next greatest thing you could possibly do and did it. What are you going to possibly do next? And they never stopped doing that for 60 issues. They just, whatever was the coolest thing they could do, they did it and then moved on and found something else that was equally great.
yeah. It's just it's hard to describe. And if you see the visual style, it all will make even more sense because it's hard, right? Because it's just like that. Then it all gels. So you can have
Yeah.
vampires, cyborgs. You have it all. But even talking about it sounds like they went too far, but they don't. It's like they push it to the crazy extremes, but it's not. It still works somehow.
Exactly. Like you would tell them, you can't do this. That will not work. You can't keep doing that. You'll burn out. They break all the rules, all
Yeah.
the rules that the general good consensus would tell you not to do. They do it and they somehow do it well. And then, but again, even afterwards, you'd be like, no, you cannot, don't follow that model. Like, don't do what they did. Do something else. Like
Right.
that's a train wreck over there, but somehow it's magic.
And so I mean, what you're dealing with is really quite a, I don't want to say, you can tell that story kind of leads more than as far as the game mechanics. You do obviously have to have mechanics, to have a
Mhm.
game. But you settled on the if I recall correctly, Powered by Apocalypse engine, right?
Forged in the Dark.
Oh,
A,
Forged in the Dark. That's
a
right.
little kid spawned from the Powered by the Apocalypse by the brilliant mind of John Harper, an indie beloved game designer who's made things like Lady Blackbird and Aegon and obviously Blades in the Dark, but a lot of little stuff that really just charmed people, especially like when I think of stuff like an indie games and demand movement, like in the early 2000s at places like Origins that was like budding. Little games like a 14-page Lady Blackbird that's kind of a little bit of a Firefly story, condensed into 14 pages that needs a lot of improv, but is an amazing tight little package. Was something that like just year after year you hear somebody talking about how they played it for the first time and they're like, it was amazing. And it's like, and he made a lot of like 2-page games that just Lasers and Feelings is another one that's pretty popular. So which was kind of like a Star Trek hack, but again, 2 pages. So a lot of streamers attached to something like that game. But yeah, so Blades in the Dark, he did his own take on Powered by the Apocalypse.
Right.
So just for listeners who are not as familiar, some of the similarities or some of the important keynotes of Powered by the Apocalypse is that the players have a lot of agency. The game master is a guide. They kind of have some rules to follow, but they're really supposed to kind of like set the players off and then watch them do their thing. I'm not there to necessarily challenge them or defeat them or kill them or tell them where to go or railroad them. I'm there in this case, like to give them, their boss gives them a case to work on. And then you're kind of following them along. And hopefully the mechanics are doing something that keeps the action, even by the roll mechanic, always moving forward. And that all of their choices narratively force them to kind of stay within the theme, no matter what they do. And those kind of hit the big notes, the player agency, fail forward in the way that like they're one of the most popular game systems that came out with you don't just succeed or fail, you succeed with the catch or you fail, but then when you fail, it's going to be like bad. It's not like re-roll. Oh, you didn't pick the lock. Let's wait 5 minutes and try again. None of that. So. And that dynamic as a GM can sometimes be off-putting or weird too, where it's like, okay, I'm supposed to sit back. What if they don't do anything?
Well, yeah, I think the difficulty with it is more sometimes with the pass fail, it's easy to deal with as a GM, but sometimes with a lot of these that you have to keep coming up with what does a partial success look like, or how bad do I make a failure? Like going back to like Dungeon World with the, with the moves, like how when you can do any kind of move on a failure, how hard of a move do you do? That can get kind of hard over time. But I think it seemed like that was less of that with at least when I was dealing with Blades in the Dark.
It's interesting because it's funny when you say that. I can see Blades like Forged in the Dark having a similar issue. Yeah. It's different, but it's still similar. It still carries some of the problem. Because like you said, one of the problems that you don't see in Forged in the Dark, Powered by the Apocalypse generally has you roll 2d6, and if it's 10 or above, it's a total success. If it's 7 to 9, is a success with a catch, and 1 through 6, it's a failure. And a lot of times, Powered by the Apocalypse, it tells you exactly what those results are. Like it'll say 10 to 12, you deal damage, and the other person doesn't take damage, and something. Pick one of these 3 options.
Yeah.
7 to 9, you both take damage, but pick, one option here and one option here, and one's good, one's bad or something. And then, the bottom one's like, you're the only one who takes damage, and, pick 2 of the 3 bad things that happen to you, which are hopefully prompts to kind of inspire you as the player or the game master of, oh, this is what happens. And I can pick 1 or 2 of the 3 things here, whichever one makes the most sense in the situation. And it kind of like, for me to just, oh yeah, that makes sense. Forged in the Dark removes that a lot of the times, but replaces it with, some more vagueness, which is good and bad. Like we don't have such a strict, like guide where it's like, okay, when you roll and you succeed with the catch, we know there will be complications. And then over on the side here is like, here's a list of like, okay, well, these are 3 types of complications. And then each of them has, 5 options that could be, and it's kind of like game master, you master this. And when these things happen, you kind of pick and choose what you're going to pepper on the character as complications.
Right.
So there's a good and a bad of both. because one is like, okay, the game master has to be really familiar. They can't just look at the book and be like, well, this is exactly what you do. But we're not stuck by the strict guidelines of this is exactly what happens, because sometimes Powered by the Apocalypse falters on one of its best qualities, is it's very stringent. Here are the 13 actions you can do in this game. If you do anything else, we will interpret them as one of these 13 actions, which is really jarring for new game masters, because they're like, I don't know which one it is. And for players, because they're like, they kind of need the game master to have enough mastery that they can say, I'm gonna attack the guy. And then the GM goes, oh, I see. That's assault and battery. And then go ahead and roll. Okay, we're gonna look at the chart on assault and battery,
Right.
Where the other has a lot more, apply as necessary. But do I give them trouble? Do I raise the danger clock? Do I give them a condition? Maybe I should give them two. Maybe I should give them one condition and raise the danger clock.
Yeah,
I kind of want to give them a narrative consequence of, this thing, they trip and hurt their toe, which has none of those other things, right? So, like every game's got the good and the bad, right? Like that's makes them uniquely fit for somebody. So,
yeah, and I think also, having a genre kind of mapped out also probably helps aid in that. Chew is definitely its own thing. And I think if a person reads the comics, it's like I played Leverage, the RPG, but I had not seen the show.
sure.
And so when I think a lot of us were playing it, but not having seen the show, we weren't, the system wasn't really working the way we were trying to make it work as players.
Yeah.
And so, it's less about finding the clues, but it's actually more about, pinning it on somebody. It's not, you know what I mean? But we were treating it as an investigative game where Leverage isn't about that. So I think the same thing with Chew. It's like, if you read the comics, you understand the vibe. If you look at the artwork, you kind of get the vibe. But I could see where if everybody's on board, this probably makes it much easier to have those rulings and understanding, and everybody's on board. But if you just go in not understanding what it's about, you can be in for a shock.
Yeah. What's interesting for us is, one, you saw the character sheets. So we have these glorious character sheets, which have art on them that, like,
well,
again,
when you say glorious, they are glorious. They are probably, I looked at this and I was like, I cannot believe how much energy and time to make such a perfect character sheet. Like, it is the most beautiful character sheet I've ever seen.
Federico Sanz, everyone, maker of Nibiru, and gosh, it's gonna kill me right now. He's got an expansion. It's Xanadu, like Xanadu or something. I don't know how that's how you pronounce it. I pronounced it like the Nintendo game, I think, but it's like Xanadu, and they are gorgeous. So when you see what else Federico does, especially for his own products that are published by Modifius, it's less surprising that you see what he's brought to Chew, but that's why you find someone like Fede. You go, you look at what they've done, and then you're like, okay, so I got this amount of money, and these are the top 5 people I found in the gaming industry, and then you just cold call, email, talk to your friends and say, hey, do you know one of these people? And then you see if they're available, because like I know one of the people we talked to was working on the One Ring, and I was like, well, you have a lot of work to do, don't you?
Yeah.
And even with Fede, luckily, you do this early enough so you have time. I contacted him and he's like, I could probably start working in June of 2021, so he had months. So that helps too, because anybody who's really, they're all freelancers. They like steady paychecks, but if you can help them fill in their calendar and they know how much money you're giving them, that helps them figure out their rent and what they're going to do and how much time they can dedicate. But yeah, especially with big talent, you need to, you need to fit their schedule. Unfortunately, fortunately, so.
Yeah, it's quite a thing. Cause I guess, this was quite a pretty big leap to go into, what you did is you licensed somebody else's IP.
Yeah.
Which I find just incredibly fascinating to be able just to go, and we kind of talked about it, a game will come, but just the idea you can kind of knock on somebody's door. Hello, I want to make a game out of your IP.
Yeah. I'm worried it could become an addiction, you know, because if you've had a lot of these episodes. So the stuff, I don't know if you talked about this, but you know, there's cool ebbs and flows in this gaming industry. And I'm saying this not that I've lived long enough. I have, but I wasn't paying attention. But you know, I've read a lot about it because there's some historians in this gig, which is cool, of stuff like Designers and Dragons. And you can kind of read other people's analyzations.
Yeah.
The word's not coming to me, of you know how this industry works, especially for how game companies kind of ebb and flow, the timetables of like when RPGs are hot. All I'm trying to say is that licenses were really big in the early 2000s, but it was very quick too that they burned out in the way that people just wrote them off as like, oh, it's Buffy, oh, it's Angel. And some of them were good, but there was a lot of them that were just like, they felt like we just, you know, phoned it in. Oh, cool, that game system and this thing, here you go. You know, like here's a D20 this, D20 that, D20 this. That just didn't feel like there was any meat to it. And I mentioned to you before the show, I was listening to you talk about like the 2D20 system with Modifius. They're getting a lot of flack for this right now, which of course they know history. Like they're doing better than that time period, but like, right, they're still getting, it's hard to have any one game system really nail a whole bunch of different games.
It is.
And it's kind of like heretical,
Yeah.
blasphemy. It's kind of blasphemous if you, as a game designer, because it's almost like game designer 101 is like, if you know, a game system probably does not fit your game. Like you have to make a game system for the game, unless miraculously it fits, or you make your thing for that system, right? Because every game's dungeon, you know, like the D and O. I'm like, is there a different way to say that? There's no game system for D&D. It's just the D&D system. Like it's Diablo, right? Like it's like it's based on like level going up, getting magical items, rinse and repeat into dungeons. Let's get more and more powerful and bigger and stronger till we can fight dragons. Like that's what it does. And if you don't have that story, like if your story, we're not going to become superheroes, you know, we're just like everyday people like Call of Cthulhu, that we're like, okay, over years, I might learn new skills, but it's not like, you know, in weeks.
Right. And yeah, D&D is its own genre. I think it's there's no, it really isn't in the, I don't even know if it's even really in any of the D&D books. The idea that you start out at level 1 and then you wind up being level 20.
It's totally the power fantasy, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, but everybody, I think like, I didn't read a lot of the Dritz books, but somebody mentioned like, you know, he maybe started out like at level 3 or 4, but he quickly went up to a high level and stayed there forever. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know that there's really any, it is what it is. I mean, it's its own thing, but I think, but when you're reading other genres or actually reading fiction, right, then do the mechanics match that fiction?
Yeah. So before I just totally throw us on that road of a tangent, you know, we're on another, because of Kickstarter, we've put ourselves back in this place where you can stand out with an IP, because it's one of the new bars when self-publishing is so easy and crowdfunding has allowed anyone to get capital. And unfortunately, you know, things are popularity contests. So if you can, you know, if you're the most popular game designer in your area, you know, most followers, you can fund your stuff. There's a sea of stuff out there. And even for some of us who've been making things for a while, if you aren't, you know, a big brand like Monty Cook, like if you're a little brand, thankfully you started, you know, a little before everyone else, because now it's even harder to be just somebody who pops on the scene because there's so many designers, so many games. But that's where we're at. It's just people who are like, okay, well, it's an IP grab. And we're seeing Free League, for example. Like Free League is probably our current leader, right, of the IP grab, which, well, that and Modifius. But I don't know when it'll burn out. But we're just at this Kickstarter period again, where we're all setting up shop in the same area. So how do you stand out? Especially when there's certain times, certain months that we all want to, you know, go out and make our money. You're trying to find how many audiences you can bring to the table. Just like the number of podcasts or interviews you do, you know, it's like, what communities will come with me when I launch? And an IP as a community, a game system as a community, podcasts are community, your local area is a community. You know, if you're a part of a group like the Indie Game Developer Network or something, that's a community. But yeah, it's kind of a game of like, like running for office, like who comes to the table with me, which groups are with me, you know?
Yeah, it's also interesting kind of tying. I should have done some more reading on this before I bring this up, but I think there's local like people freaking out because Doctor Who's going to use the D&D fifth edition rules.
Yeah, I just saw that. I saw that and I was very interested myself because, you know, I don't ever really read into these things too much, as in like, you know, I got an email notification that there was some stuff on Twitter and one of them caught my eye and it was about something about that. So I actually opened it and looked at it and I saw someone else apologize if good note, you know, because he said, you know, I kind of bandwagoned them too. And I'm a notable designer and I shouldn't do that. And they're right. So, I mean, like Hellboy, you know, I was doing research for Chew and Hellboy last summer launched 5e, Manus Studios or something out of the UK. Huge, you know, like $300,000 Kickstarter or something. 5e has been the largest growing, biggest booming, solid, you know, bang for your buck system du jour on Kickstarter for the last few years. There was a very strong period for Powered by the Apocalypse beforehand, but then, you know, if you look, I don't have the data in front of me, but clearly it's like who is making the most money on the regular in the Kickstarter area of tabletop role-playing games, and you would clearly see it's the 5e, right? Like the world's greatest role-playing game system, the
Right.
5e OGL stuff. So it gets a lot of hate in the industry and from the game design community because we're resentful, we're jealous, we're annoyed. I personally like it's a weird thing to spend so much time every day thinking and working and building a business on role-playing games and not be in the 5e space or the Pathfinder or maybe the DCC space, which are big, but not anywhere near as big as, you know, the big dog. And know that at any time, if somebody came to me and was like, hey, Pete, I want to make something for role-playing games, like, you know, and they had some fantasy anything, I'm going to tell them and be like, you should really do something 5e adjacent with this, even if it's just to get started. It's like that thing, like something like your parents tell you growing up, or, you know, someone mentoring you will always tell you the best thing you should do, but it may not be the thing you want to do or the thing that's for you.
Right, exactly.
And we're all struggling to make, you know, to find our audience, to make it to the next level, to sell more product, to get the better talent. It doesn't matter who you are. It just seems like, because it's just a niche industry, right? So we're all just fighting tooth and nail, but people like, I'm not crossing that line. And unfortunately, that's kind of what it is. There's a lot of people feeling like it's like crossing the line. Now, Cubicle 7 is a big company with a lot of licenses, a lot of great products, a lot of great games, quality stuff, been at conventions for years. You know, I think they're a UK-based company. I could be wrong.
No, I
but
believe
mean,
they are. Yeah.
that's even harder to bridge the gap because, you know, when you go to conventions and stuff, how do you get your shit there? You know, like anything over the waters. Even now, could you imagine now with the supply chain stuff? I mean, it's just all a joke. Or you have double. You have stuff stored here and stuff stored there, but then where do you put it? Because then you still got to have somebody to take it from there. You know, it's a nightmare. So they have a lot of hurdles that they're dealing with to be as viable as they have been. So anyway, yep, they've had a, what's it? I think the guy said he's got like a 10-year run with Doctor Who. Like they have a lot of product line and products and like a long-standing good game people are happy with. And they're like, you know what? His justification was like, we did this with the One Ring too, but nobody cared as much then, right, as they do now.
Right, like why, you know, yeah, exactly. I'd be shocked too. It's like all of a sudden.
He said there was hate, but it wasn't like as publicized as it is now.
Well, but I think, yeah, it may, and I don't understand why people would be so angry over that, but it's there's more adjacency with D&D.
People hate selling out.
Yeah,
that's all it is. It's 100% all it is. And unfortunately, it's who decides if you sold out. That's like one of those long-standing conversations, right? That's been around since the 60s. Like, who gets to decide what's selling out and what's not? There's clear, visible selling out, but like, you know, that line moves.
But to
and
me,
right now, if you go 5e, when you don't do that, you sold out.
Well, to me, the problem is, for me, would be like, I can't imagine how you would make a Doctor Who using the 5e. I mean, to me, the gymnastics of coming up with a game system that works for that style of game, to me, is I can't even, I don't know I don't know how they would handle it.
Well, and what you're saying here is the truth is that it does and it doesn't, right? Like I wanted to say flat out it doesn't, but just like when I was young, we played everything in D&D, right? Like, or because Shadowrun was one of my early game systems, we played other games that were not really Shadowrun, but they were like something like it. It was a homebrew thing that was basically using the rule system. You can make it work. It doesn't sing. It's not good at it, but most people don't care. There's a reason why 60% or more of the industry still plays D&D. They don't care that much about the mechanics. And the current movement of since Critical Role, the boom we've been experiencing is like don't let them get in the way. Like the rules aren't that important. It's the story. But all this is more like D&D is not that good. It's okay. Just deal with it. That's what we're hearing.
Well, but I think in general, I think it's, I actually need to talk to people who've actually played the Doctor Who role-playing game, but
okay.
In general, I mean, to me, those shows are very difficult. To me, those would be very difficult to encapsulate mechanics.
Right. I mean, well, like we said earlier, cool. Now the Doctor has levels. How about that? It's just funny to think about. You're like, okay. Suddenly his abilities are like spells or like use per day abilities, I mean, like it's going to be weird for people who have played the other one. But what they would say to you is, this isn't for you. This is for the people who will never leave D&D, who will play this because they're like, oh, I like Doctor Who and I like D&D. It's not for anybody else.
I just wonder
hopefully those people will buy this and then buy the other one.
Oh, I'm sure it would be, but I just wonder, but if it's bad, if the mechanics are bad and people don't like it, I mean, legitimately just say, you know what, this isn't Doctor Who. That's a danger too. But I think you're right. I mean, if you could tie anything to something that's already because people, there's two groups of people. I think with gaming, there's people who enjoy running different game systems every, a few times a year. And there's other people, it's like, no, we are sticking with, this.
I wish I knew what the number was, but I was told or read something that seemed to be the common thought for a while, but I just don't know how dated it is. But they were saying that it was like for a long period of time that people only would ever play in their life 3 games. And that suddenly it was like, we've had since like the 90s, in the 80s. I mean, it really just keeps going back. There's been a lot of games, but for a long period of time, people only still on average played like 3 games in their life. Yeah. So there's a long-standing history that like we've lived, like those last 30, 40 years or whatever, is like an explosion with the internet and games and all kinds of video games and, phone games and now role-playing, it's all just all there. But we're fighting like human psychology of things like, my grandparents would tell you that like games are for kids, and there's just a long-standing history still.
My mom was that way.
That maybe you still play those games.
You still play those games? Like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my mom doesn't understand. Like, my dad was asking me the other day. He's like, "Oh, you have a new game?" It's just like, yeah, this is the big one that we talked about. It's not what they care about, so it is what it is.
No, it's hard to comprehend. It's like my son playing Roadblocks. I watch it and I just don't get it.
Yeah. Well, and I think I heard you talk in a different episode about, it's like actual plays for us. And for a lot of people, there's some kind of like generational age gap for most. Now there's quite a few people, of their like 35 plus that it's nostalgic because they haven't had a gaming group. So there's a large amount of people out there who would say, it's not always age. So for some of us, it's just like, I missed having a table of people to geek out over something with. So they're just enjoying the camaraderie as much as they are the actual thing. But for most of us, I didn't know there was a World of Darkness documentary. Have you seen that?
No.
There's a World of Darkness documentary on Amazon Prime.
Are you serious?
And it came out like a couple years ago. It's over an hour long. I haven't finished it yet, but I've been watching it. It's what's funny about documentaries is they make everything sound awesome. Like if you have a documentary about anything,
yeah,
suddenly that thing is the most interesting thing in the world. And I think part of it is because they can like sensationalize things that you don't remember that well. So they just talked about how like it came out of the 80s and like how like the changing of the 80s to the 90s and like the music shifting and like the generational of like the Republicans in control and the wall coming down, all this stuff. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. And you're right. Vampire the Masquerade is the reason why it all happened. And then I was like, what the F did I just say? You know, like it was just like this counterculture movement. But anyway, you should watch it if you get time because it's cool and it's about the industry. So like, of course, you're going to be super stoked. And it talks about like how it came about and like what it meant and like what it really built and how it changed role-playing games and all the stuff that came out, you know, influenced by it, you know, the years after. But I wish I remembered why that was important. I totally forgot why that was important.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't rewind that far.
We were talking about Doctor Who and selling out. And like you said, it just it'll be a 5e version with levels and some kind of magic. And we know that like what this game system's good for is fighting monsters, gaining levels, and you know, but like Chew would not be good for Dungeons and Dragons.
No.
Like the characters, while they evolve and get better at what they do over time, over 60 issues of years of comic books, it's still nowhere near like going from like 1st to 5th level. You know, like that's just the thing is most games that doesn't matter.
The key though, I think, isn't the experience. The key for that, as far as experience points, the key to Chew and playing Chew is the experience of playing in that world.
Yeah.
That's the reward.
Yeah. And, you know, like most games of a similar feel, part of the audience for Chew is that like you get to be above the law. You get to be a person along the spectrum of any which way. Like you can be a mooch or, you know, a bag, or you could be smart. You could be, you know, smart to the point where you're condescending. But, you know, it's a game where it doesn't, you don't have any problems being bad or taking anything to the extremes, whether good or bad in that comic sense, right? Like they should be flawed characters. And there's a freedom in that. And it's often a freedom not seen in something like investigative games where, you know, often it's very like to the point and analytical and be safe and be reserved. In this game, it's literally like, no, seriously, if you want to blame, you know, the airport attendant that screwed up your flight in the very first moment of the game, you can keep building a case and just blame them for what happened. And at least get away with it for the one shot. You know, I mean, eventually someone's going to be like, did they do it? Did they really? Especially if there's like murders related, like there's going to keep being murders, but you know, you'll be gone.
Yeah. And I think there's a certain amount of, you know, and there's games, you know, you don't want the wheels coming off, but yeah, this is one where there is no problem with wheels coming. I mean, it's actually, I don't want to say it's encouraged. You know, there's still limits, but in general, it is a game of just outlandishness.
One of the things I try to say, and for those that have seen Tropic Thunder, the movie, and you know, know the beloved scene of like, I got your TiVo, and like the guy's movie agent from years ago that somehow over the course of the movie is worried that he's losing his old star that no longer matters because he's more successful now, but he still feels tied to that person. Like that person was the reason he got big in the first place and has a successful, you know, like movie agent career, that he's going to go to where they're filming in like Myanmar and make sure that he gets his TiVo, like the star that he is, that he should have suitable conditions. And like he arrives to throw that in the way of a helicopter that is shooting a rocket launcher at like the star cast. And the TiVo explodes gloriously. And somehow, of course, you know, the TiVo blows up and they're okay, like from a rocket, you know, in the sky. But the point is, out of the blue, you should have saw it coming. At the end, there's the, I got your TiVo out of nowhere. And it flies away and explodes in the sky. And the people are on the ground are like, what the hell just happened? And if that doesn't happen, every game of Chew in some way, it kind of failed. Like it should have something probably out of the character's own history, like some person or thing in their troubled past, because they each have a trouble on their sheet of something that's a personal problem that's plaguing them. If that doesn't explode in their face and threaten to take the A plot over, it's probably like it's probably failed in some way. And I kind of wondered, you made me think something earlier was that like it's a game where almost like if its mechanics are a little messy and all over the place, it fits like the medium, like the story, right?
Yes, you're right. There's no challenge ratings.
It
This
shouldn't be
is
super clean. If it's too
yeah.
clean, it wouldn't be Chew, you know?
Yeah, why are these people in jars? I don't know.
I don't know why this game system is forcing me to only have these 3 options at all times. I can only do this or this. You know, one of the things I did want to get back to, because it's important as a selling point, but also as a game designer feedback thing of like, so how do we make the characters feel like Chew for the people who don't know Chew? And like we mentioned, you know, a lot of the case, the world itself, because everyone's got like a food power or they're a celebrity, they got some weird quirk, but they also each have 3 approaches, which are just like characteristics, like personality traits that describe the characters and everything they do. And it helps a lot of people figure out who their character is from the moment they have a character sheet in front of them.
Right.
Because they can know what to play to. And what we like about that too is that, like a comic book character, most of them have, like we said, like maybe they're dutiful or vengeful or brash to a flaw. So by having things like that, not only are we helping you figure out that this is a person, that you're playing a character, but also making sure that it stays a little bit tropey in the way that like one of these will kind of be a little bit of your doom. Like, you know, are you brooding? Are you kind of a hornball? You know, there's something here that's also a little bit risque for you. But yeah, having those quirks, like if you can cook really fast, oh boy, what does that do? But if you tie that in with being able to have mashed potato drones or making tortillas into like tortilla ninja stars, suddenly it's like I can whip up tortillas as fast as you can start throwing them as ninja stars. And we have a cool combination of powers. But when you start throwing ninja stars made out of tortillas against like a gang of people with machine guns, you know, like it changes the tone and the mood of what's going on.
Right.
And how you feel as a player approaching it, you know? So characters have playbooks are kind of like our classes, which is common with Powered by the Apocalypse and Forge in the Dark. And they give you a list of perks, which are kind of like special abilities unique to your, you know, class or playbook in this case. And those also add to it. For those that don't know Forge in the Dark, one of the notable differences of that from Powered by the Apocalypse is that, for better or worse, which may be a good discussion point, is it's got this thing called position and effect. So every time you go to do anything, the player tells the game master what I'm going to use to make my roll. And the game master tells them, okay, I think if you did that in this situation, it would have this level of risk and this possible level of reward. And then they can revise or roll. So the point of that is the game master never tells you what to roll. You might walk up to some person and clearly you're going to have a conversation with them. And like most games, you're like, oh, that's a charm roll. No, that player is going to tell me why it's gutsy if they want to. And they're going to describe how it fits better for guts. And then I'm going to say, based on kind of how I buy it, right, that I think they're either in control of the situation, it's risky, or it's desperate. And that's going to change the tone of whatever the role is on like how many consequences there are, to what level. Could this potentially crit fail kind of thing? And also it might change how I judge. Will it have a limited effect, a standard effect, or a great effect, kind of like a crit success if they succeed? And it's a game, because of all that player agency it wants the players to have, it wants the players to be able to kind of choose how they want to play the game. And for the judge, again, to kind of guide their choices, make sure they kind of know what's going on. So the perks of a character sheet, like the different playbooks, also play in things like that, because choose a game where we said above the law, some people are, you know, running into their problems. It's a new way to kind of also mechanize mechanics. Unlike we can base mechanics also on, are you in a desperate situation? How often are you putting your player character in a desperate situation? Because as the hotshot playbook, we want you to be desperate more often because you're reckless or brash. And when you are, we want you to be successful or have these added benefits, because we want you to play to that, because that's who you tried to play, which is a little bit of guiding we said from Powered by the Apocalypse, but it's a neat twist mechanically that we have these threat levels per action roll, that we have these labels of the kind of effect you can have, so that we can also build rules on top of those. Like, oh, every time this character has a great effect when talking to other people, since they're the mascot, you know, like somebody falls in love with them. Okay, right? Like now I know that will happen, but I want to make sure that I'm getting great effects when I go to do stuff. And if not, I'm talking to the game master in a conversation with everyone else around hearing it. And maybe they'll help, maybe we'll contribute, we'll collaborate, because we all kind of then start understanding what we're doing. But keeping that conversation alive at the table.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too is I do read some people who more traditional gamers kind of poo-pooing.
Oh, sure.
And I
kind of did too. Yeah, before, yeah, especially.
But I think they obviously have never played, and there's a lot of assumptions that just because there is this going on the table doesn't mean that the characters are safe. It actually may be the other way. People may be taking more risk because now risk in this type of game, risks can be interesting.
Yeah, because that's total segue into another love it or hate it thing about Forge in the Dark is that they have resistance. So you have this meter of a resource. In Blades in the Dark, it's your stress. In Chew, it's your appetite. It's a number of points you have on a bar that you can spend to get an extra die when you need it for like describing a thing in a certain way or helping someone else do something. But you can also spend it to resist consequences. So I can put myself in a desperate situation, roll like shit. It'd be horrible what happens. And then be like, you know what? But I'm going to spend some resistance over here. And what you just told me, Game Master, you're either going to say it didn't happen or you're going to reduce it. Like I didn't die. I lost my hand, or a bomb exploded and I'm under the rubble, but I didn't die or get crumbled or crushed or maimed. Again, total player agency thing is why it exists. But with Chew, it became this thing that was so perfect. It was one of the selling points. I now, as a game master, no longer ever have to worry about trying to kill your character. I don't care if it's 5 minutes in. I don't care if it's an hour in. I don't care if it's back-to-back rolls. I can, whenever I want, have a sniper shoot you because it makes sense in the narrative, have a person walk in and just shoot the first person that's there. You catch a gun in your hand and it blow the digits off your fingertips off. And I can say these things and do these things to your character because you have a number of times based on the dice that you'll be able to say, you know what, that's a little too far. Or that's too much. Or don't kill my character. But when it runs out, you can't stop it anymore. So you also know the first time you're like, oh, well, that's great. Oh, God. Okay, well, I can do this more than one time, I guess. But then the second time, or maybe the third time, you realize pretty quickly that, oh, he will never hold his punches back. If I have run into a situation and they all have guns, every single one of them might try to shoot me in the head, or I just might be like barraged, right? Like it's the hero movie with the arrows at the end, the guy 10,000 strong army shoots arrows at one guy, and you kind of have this like as a game master moment of like having your cake and eating it too, because the first one maybe gets them to go, oh, well, I don't know if I like that. I could just resist that, but we still got to describe it. And it still put a little tension on the table because the player's still kind of like, are they really just going to let me like roll to pay how many points? And it didn't happen. But if it keeps happening, it's like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You've now seen him kill a few people and you're the only one left, it's coming. Right. Unless you do something about it. And we're also generous about you being able to do stuff because Chew is very important. We wanted some chemistry, which you don't necessarily see so much in the one shots because the players don't have chemistry either, right? But them being like, I know it's in the middle of the case, but I really need a little R&R right now, which adds to the zaniness and the chemistry of, well, somebody's going to be mad at you for trying to take a break in the middle of the case to go like write a poem or whatever your jam is. But you're losing some of your drive or you're getting really beat up with conditions. And these things require sometimes conversations with other players to kind of boost you back up or to lash out at somebody or to tell someone a lie so that you can cover things up. You have all these cool, interesting effects, whether it's to heal your character fast or to remove these conditions that are building, which is again, kind of like healing your character, but more efficiently or trying to regain some of that appetite so you could resist stuff again, but at the cost of time or the case getting worse because you're kind of blowing things off a little bit, which is important because people do that in real life too. And we want that element. Like I said from the get-go, there's got to be moments where the player's like, just fuck this case today, man. Like, can't we just, tomorrow we'll wake up and we'll do our job. But tonight, you know what? Screw this. Like, this is just too much. I'm having a shit day. So we like that those choices exist.
And I think the thing too, it's like,
Right.
I don't know if it's always the case, but like the whoever the manager was for our characters. I mean, she was in a position of being an antagonist. I mean, there's a number of characters and situations that are in there that you can play off all those, I'm angry or I'm whatever. I can't remember all those different conditions are, but and also with your character, a number of hooks for them to interact in ways that you can ham it up. I mean, it's really to me a game about hamming things up. This is not a game about being conservative. This is drive it like you stole it. This is that type of game.
That's the best fit for how, like we said, the action-packed nature of every episode or every comic issue in 20 some pages being like, wow, that was great. But like, they had a thing, they did it, they thought of completion, but there's still something going on. But there was no building. It was like, wow, they went there already. I thought that was gonna be like 3 issues in, or as comics do, a lot of times they do like 5-issue arcs, because that's why they wrap a trade paperback these days.
Yeah.
Because like industries are changing. We like to binge watch TV, right? That's happened in the last 10, 15 years, is like the Netflix effect. So it's killing the comic industry right now, because the comic industry they need you to buy the comics, but you wait till there's 5 or 6 of them, and then months after that for when they release it in the collection. And that's how you're eating them up these days. But that's not how their industry works. So, they're having like 6, especially if they're like, Image Comics or, groups that are more independent, IDW and stuff, like the creators, if they're creator owned, like they're just putting out shit for, it's kind of like a Kickstarter, right? But instead of not being front loaded, it's back loaded. Like they're just like, I'm going to put out a bunch of shit and a bunch of shit and a bunch of shit, months of like, 80-hour weeks. And then I'm just in the red. And then here's the trade paperback. Oh, thank God. Or I'm done. I'm out of business. There are a lot of industries that have just been thrown for a loop, whether it's the last 20 years or the last 2 with COVID. I don't know how that gets fixed either. I mean, unless they all go to Kickstarter. Maybe that's what it is. You go to Kickstarter, you get that preloaded money for 3 issues, you crowdfund it or something. That's got to be like, I don't, at least, I mean, that's how it works in my industry. So I guess that's why I see it that way. But
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not, as into comics like I was, but things don't go back.
Yeah.
And
no, they don't.
And whatever this is now, it won't stay this way forever. That'd be something different.
Yeah. I mean, I was doing Mike Broder's show. He does, he's a host on Fear the Beat, which is like the longest running like RPG podcast. They're like,
I used to listen to it for a long time.
Yeah. And Broder started as kind of like their retail liaison, because he was a part of the Fantasy Shop, which is a really successful chain of stores in St. Louis. But he's got his own thing at goinfo.org, like the influence organization. He's doing like Why We Game with news and stuff. And he has really been working an angle that he thinks, RPGs are going digital. And by that, he means that D&D and Wizard of the Coast is going digital, and it's coming. And, again, we don't know. That's all he said, she said right now. But, D&D Beyond has been killing it, and people love it. And it's really been setting the stage, honestly, for that. And they have corporate masters over there at Hasbro. And, we're about at the next anniversary for D&D, which would, probably link up with the next edition. But 5e is really popular right now. So it's probably like a 5.5 thing, which may be a great time to go digital. Because
they can't do the missteps of 4e.
Yeah, that's why you got to do 5.5. You can't go 6 because it's too scary.
But I mean, as far as I think they tried to create a system I've never played 4E. This is just me from what I've heard, is that it was almost impossible to make a character. But if you subscribe to these online tools,
Yeah.
it was very easy.
Yeah.
And that they really are trying to force people into digital subscriptions.
I almost bought Lancer the other day, like kind of the hottest, most recent mech game.
Yeah.
And I saw a review on it and they were like, yeah, the character sheets are shit. The character creation kind of is just too much analysis paralysis, but they have the best character creation app ever. And you will never make a character without it. And I was just like, okay, it wasn't the app. It was the, like, you just told me plenty of the reasons why I really don't need it in my life. Like, I love the art and I like the idea and the concept, but I did see enough tactical in it and that it also kind of made me want to steer clear, volume of pages and enough heft that I'm like, I don't expect my players to learn, that I'm going to have to teach them.
That's hard. Right. I mean,
and then the app, I was like, no.
I've had a friend who's playing Lancer online and he loves it. But I don't know how most of the people that I run games for, they do not want to do much investing of time into anything. They just want to like Chew, that's what's perfect. Like Chew, it's just come and play. My oldest daughter was talking about, some friends were playing Vampire. I said, well, it's not going to be the game for you because it's more about the lore than it is the mechanics. And if you don't understand all these clans and their relationships and, that's really where the juice is for that game. It's not really in the games. Not saying the game system's bad, but, it's not like playing, like a Powered by Apocalypse Monster of the Week, where I'm a vampire. Okay.
It is kind of hard. I know for years there, because I saw a lot of games in the convention environment, and I was selling Urban Shadows with, for Magpie, because they were a network at the time. And, Urban Shadows just, to me, clearly just seemed like your alternative. It's like, hey, this is the 1, 2 to 300 6x9 book that you'll ever need.
Yeah.
Good. Here's the couple things that'll hold you back. Like, it kind of leans towards having one of each faction.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't really want you to all be vampires, which you can. It just doesn't really want you to, because it's a little bit more about the city and the politics between the different factions. But I mean, World of Darkness, like, you want to get interested now, it's like Warhammer, there isn't a core book that tells you the whole game anymore, because you need more than one book for the lore, let alone, like the system and how to play it and other things. So if you're getting in, I guess, I always look at it as a game master though, right? I look at it like I have to read every bit of it. As a player, it's different. If you're like, hey, will you run this game for me? Cool. I'll buy the core book and, read 10 pages, like the 10 pages that are important to me.
Yeah. And when I want a game I want to play or run is RuneQuest, but I also realize it's a lot of reading on my part to at least, because that's a very cultural heavy game as well.
And that can be great, but like you said, it sounds like you have the same thing I do. Like, and I mostly look at like Legend of the Five Rings experience and Shadowrun experience of like, great lore, interesting dynamics, politics, history, interesting thing, like especially Shadowrun, like just, bending how we look at society, activities that happen every 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And like, here's the 20-page crash course of all the crazy ass shit you couldn't imagine that happened, or something like our world. And you can't get anybody to read any of it. They just don't. Like, most players, it's like they show up to the game, like, oh, we were all supposed to make our characters last week, but these 2 people weren't there. They show up and they're still working on this meeting. And, like, it's just all a little sloppy and behind. And you will have at least one person who will read all that stuff, and they will be as caught up or further than you, but it's just, it sucks that if it doesn't have teeth, like it doesn't mechanically force them to know, then they don't, a lot of role-playing games forever had that 20 questions thing.
I think it's where Blades in the Dark wins, in that they have a pretty detailed system, but it's left fairly open.
Sure.
And you can only just say there's ghosts and there's electric guns and there's this. And they're like, okay.
Well, mostly because the mechanics then become narrative. Like, these are like Legend of the Five Rings, even the newest versions was like, oh, you need an NPC? Make a whole character.
Right.
I mean, that's a joke. Like, I'm like, what? Yeah, you close the book, put it back on the shelf. Like, I'm never doing that again. Maybe for like the one big bad, like, but don't tell me like there's no rules on how to make like the shopkeeper like that might turn bad. But Powered by the Apocalypse is going to be like, it's a guy. So basic rules of it's a guy. And here are 3 narrative traits, like the pushy, they're insulting or they're like super strong or something. And then like when that stuff helps, it's like they get a +1 or a reroll, that kind of stuff is like the new age rules, light mechanics, where like I can make up that person as needed, and I like having that freedom as a game master. I can't imagine how some people, I mean, a lot of people, especially Dungeons and Dragons, do that, where they're prepping 2 hours for the 2-hour encounter they're going to have,
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
I haven't done that in so long, and I just never want to go back,
No.
Well, and it's funny, speaking about that aloud, is I really truly feel like it won't be that much longer before we have enough internet connectivity with augmented reality or something where it's like, we won't have to, because we'll just be like, Cloud, I want this, this, and this. And everything will be at least farther enough on the internet that it's like, we can all play GURPS again, because like all the math can happen up there, right?
Exactly. Like, well, that's what I realized with, I was playing I subscribed to the Foundry, which is, it's tabletop. It's a virtual tabletop software.
Which people are loving, by the way. I did a Roll20, Kickstarter stretch goal, and a ton of people were like, just Roll20, only Roll20. What about Foundry? Here's all the facts, details. Did you know that the Foundry is this, this, and this? And I was like, whoa.
Yeah, you can put random tables in there.
People love Foundry.
Yeah, and it's really easy to set random tables. So you could play, they set up, I've not played the hero system one, but they've got a hero system one set up. But I was just seeing like Rollmaster, that was a complicated game. You roll on a chart, you do the cross indexing, then you see if you got a crit, then you flip to the proper critical chart, and you roll on that. It's like, well, if you could just do it in one button, all that taken care of, but bada boom, bada bing, you can go suddenly back to complex.
We won't be playing rules light games anymore.
Right? It's going to go the other way.
I love them, and that's my jam. But like, that's the problem. The reason they exist is the functionality, right? Like, we all have busier lives than ever because we all have cell phones, so that changed everything, and the internet, right? Clearly. But like, every moment of your day, you have something to look at if you want to, and it's at the palm of your hand. We're never bored anymore, which I can't imagine, because like I wouldn't have any of the creativity or the thoughts or the great games that I had, at least as a youth, that I'm sure carries some over to today, right, of who I am, if I wasn't so damn bored.
Yeah, I mean, there was nothing on TV. There's no ride. I walked home from school.
Yeah.
I would get on my bike. I would ride all over town, kicking over logs, looking for bugs. I mean,
you'd read D&D books because you're at school. So what else are you gonna do?
Or it's just a cold afternoon. There's nothing on. There's only 3 channels, and you're going to make a dungeon. You're going to pull out the Dungeon Master's Handbook. You're going to draw out the dungeon, and you're going to calculate the costs while you're doing it. Yeah,
I beat the video game I was playing. I went to the video store the other day, and I played all the new stuff I cared to. I rode the bus home, or like you said, I took a walk to school, or whatever it is. Like, there was just thought and time, and it's just it's a really big thing that no one really talks about, enough, is the loss of boredom, which is a weird thing to say out loud. But
yeah, if you ever read reading like Calvin and Hobbes, that was, I didn't necessarily go to dinosaurs, but that was my childhood. I was on an alien planet. I was doing whatever, I would go for laundry. They have like this like almost like a doorway, and I would walk through it and like, what if this goes to another dimension? But it's just like our world. I mean, you have all these crazy thoughts that you just, whatever it may be, you're stomping around, you're on a frozen planet, you're on Hoth. I mean, it's just, that's the kind of stuff we did. But now you're right. You don't have the opportunity to be bored. You're not forced into those situations. But even as an adult, I'm like finding myself angry. Like, why do I have to have my cell phone, to look at any moment that I have nothing going on.
Yeah, right. I don't know about you. It's it seems like a lot of us go through at least periods where like we put the phone down. Like,
Yeah.
can I just leave it in the other room for an hour? But like anything else, you will have those times where it's I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but then somebody's coming to you and like, why didn't you have your phone?
Yeah.
Why aren't you by your phone? What if there's an emergency? And you're like, hey man, I don't need to be tied to my phone every hour, every minute of the day. But that's becoming less and less acceptable, so it's
Well, and that's just it. Because you think about, that's what I was thinking about too. It's like, like you don't have a phone with you and you're going to be gone. It's like, I might be worried, like, well, you don't have your phone. It's like, it's like, in the 90s, we didn't have any phones. In the 80s, we didn't have phones. There was no, you know what I mean? The only phone you had was the one that was wired to a wall. If you got in a car and drove, there's no calling anybody. But now we get like panicky, like going on a trip without a phone or whatever.
I can tell, or even like I drive like 30 minutes and I'm like, I'm going to leave my phone to charge or something. But now I have those thoughts because I usually have the safety and security of having it in case of emergency, and you're just like, when did that happen? Or I'm worried about it 10 minutes later on the road because like, if I get stranded, what am I going to do without a phone? And when you see people stranded, it's different now because you're like, yeah, oh, look, they got a phone. Clearly they're calling for help. It's
exactly. I can just
if you're the
drive
person
by
without the phone,
Yeah.
like, everyone's just driving by. Like, obviously they have a phone.
Yeah, it's definitely a different world. It's definitely rewired us. And I think with gaming, it's going to be interesting to see where that all heads. I know there's been a push, I think, to electronic implementation in games, like a decade ago, which I think failed.
Yeah, it's coming though.
But
it's like the
right.
D&D, like you said, 4E, it's too early. D&D Beyond, killing it now. I don't know much about it other than it's killing it, and everyone that I know that uses it loves it. I'm with you. I'm like, that seems like a death nail. How could you possibly move to subscription? I mean, if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be D&D successfully, right? Like, and they're as big as ever. Do they need everyone to go do it? No. It goes back to the Cubicle 7. Like, if 60% of the market plays D&D and 60% of them don't care if your game's good, because to them it's, oh, well, of course it's good. It's D&D, but Doctor Who. Like, they don't know what's good mechanics. They just play Doctor Who D&D. And they're okay with that. But then us snobby people, connoisseurs, right, the enthusiasts, the niche, the industry right over here in the bubble are like, the 20% on the side are like, what are those idiots doing? Like, we're the overlords. Like, they don't even know, they're just sheep and they're playing the D&D Doctor Who.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the thing is, obviously, we can see the economically speaking, I mean, that fixes all your supply chain issues.
Yeah, and Cubicle 7's you're just trying to keep it going, right? And then like, hey, we did 10 years of good Doctor Who. So what if we're gonna do 3 years of bad Doctor Who? It's gonna sell. And we're gonna then we get more money to make some more good, whatever the next thing you like is, I did used to joke about, it's probably a bad analogy, but I would say stuff like, where's the Legend of Zelda video game? Like, I'm sorry, video game. Where's the Legend of Zelda, like, role-playing game? And some people are like, oh, it's D&D. There's a lot of things that are like, could be D&D, but they're not. Like, what I mean is, there are cash cows and they exist and they're right in front of you. I thought Kids on Bikes was kind of a cash grab, like this. It was like, oh, Stranger Things season 2. Let's take Savage Worlds, call it, Kids on Bikes. And and then picking on them, but like, like a brotherly picking, because they're cool people. Like Lewandowski and Gilmore is like the hottest. What's the God, I can't think of the name, but he made that board game that was like the it's kind of like the Walking Dead board game. I can't think of what it's called. Like damn it. But yeah, I mean,
Dead of Winter.
Yes, yeah, and like hottest board game designer at the time, or one of them. And then like Lewandowski is like pretty renowned, done a lot of stuff. Let's take Stranger Things right on season 2's opening and like $100,000 Kickstarter. And then you get it and it's like 60 pages, like 40 really of content, and 60 more of like adventures that are stretch goals they put in there. You know, you're like, what? There's like nothing to this. It's like it's a zine with
Yes.
like 6 more adventure zines put on top of it that are like 4
Right.
pages. But I do joke because they credited my first game Dream Chaser, so I have no hard feelings. Yeah, but you know, I mean, it's okay. Like businesses do cash grabs. Like it's not called a cash grab, but it's a business. Like that's what they're supposed to survive, you know, like they're supposed to make money.
Yeah, I just thought of it. It's not a big cash grab, but I just thought of something. It's like, you know, there's this company that's an OSR company where they have an SRD, but they don't really have any write-ups for the creatures.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I could just do a book and just do a write-up, so it's a separate bestiary.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it do something different with it, but it's like, okay, I could probably just crank this out over time, just write a little bit each day, and then at the end of a year, maybe do a book and actually make some money without really having to. And then and since we're dealing with just standard D&D style monsters, I could go to stock art at $2 a piece, get some really good stock art. And if I'm doing 130 creatures,
Sure.
like, okay, I could systematically do this. Maybe it won't be quite the kids on bikes, but it's like, but you're right, there are opportunities out there if
You
people
know,
want to look for those.
with you saying that, you know, just in the conversation here, like I don't hear anybody crying foul for like the Morkborg things that are happening, like people making, you know, Morkborg additional stuff, or in particular Mothership stuff. Like,
Oh yeah.
these are other, you know, like cash grabs, if you will. But I mean, like, I'm not going to pick on the guy in particular, but like I was looking at a Kickstarter that I was kind of interested. It was about fishing, and I just backed it, and then, you know, a couple of years ago, and I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. I don't know anything about like fishing role playing games, so I just, you know, picked it up, like PDF only or something. And then I was looking through it the other day because I was just interested in it, and the layout is like horrendous. Like it's just horrible in the way that, I mean, like the table of contents somehow stretch out for like 23 pages. And it's not because there's that many. It's because like he does like, you know, single column, like, you know, double spaced the whole table of contents over like the first 20 pages. Like it's just horribly amateur, right? Like, and you see it's like the designer is the same person who did the layout, you know, it's clearly like the first thing. And then I just checked them, you know, I went to Kickstarter and was like, I wonder if this guy ever did anything else. I don't know why. I just did, right? Because I research stuff all the time. And I was kind of curious and I wanted to read the thing. And I was like, I wonder if he got better, you know, like I wonder where this went. And I see something else like a year later, because that was like 2019. It wasn't that long ago. And I see there's 3 Kickstarters. And then like the second one, you know, he did like 4,000 or something. The first one did like 1,000 or something. This one, right? Like the thing it was. And you know, I'm like, okay, so people came back, like he's building his audience. And then the third one, like 16,000. And I was like, wow. And then I look at the cover. And it's this amazing cover because it's like, you know, fishing in Morkborg. You know, so it's just like, wow. So that really made me think about it. So when you said this, I was like, oh yeah, but I mean, stuff like that. Like you can take Morkborg's art. I mean, he still had a different art, but like the thematic style, the theme, and the words, and say like of Morkborg or of Mothership. And those people are making a lot of money right now too. Like they're not making, I mean, some of them are making 100,000, but you know, there are other things like, you know, if Cubicle 7 doesn't want to sell it that far.
Yeah.
Like they're like, you're right. Sorry. We're going to change Doctor Who from 5e to Mothership. And then suddenly nobody cares, you know? Yes.
Well, I didn't I forget the guy's name who did Urban Shadows.
Mark?
Yeah.
Or Brendan Conway?
I think Margaret like they did the Avatar.
Yeah.
And people like, I guess, like were like incredibly angry. And you're like, you know, this guy's like,
they're really angry? Hispanic? That's funny.
These guys just like, well, I think the indie people were like, you know, like a sellout kind of thing. But it's like, you have because he's Hispanic, isn't he?
He is, yeah.
So you get somebody that is an independent game designer from a minority community who's actually
you couldn't find a
successful.
more passionate advocate for, whether it's minorities, people of color, underprivileged, marginalized community.
Yeah.
Like, he's the reason why the Indie Game Developer Network exists. He's a huge proponent of like the Games on Demand movement. Like kind of like one of the four. I mean, he probably wouldn't like to be called one of the forefathers because he's like 40 something, but like of like the modern indie game movement. I mean, he's been in the trenches for a long time, really stand up for doing big things and calling people out on their shit. He's the business manager for Seventh Sea when that was 1.6 million and was like the biggest thing ever in RPGs. He was the second in command of that ship that was like, we only did stretch goals to 30,000 because there was no way in hell would ever do that, like over the whole month.
Right.
And it was done in an hour. It's like, I don't know what we do now, but I'm with you. Like, it's just sad that, like you said, that
yeah, we should also be celebrating. You know what I mean?
all of the talk, right? Like, there couldn't have been the other person this could be, like, or I'm not saying that Mark's the end all be all, right? There's still obviously.
Well, but here's what to me makes me think highly of him, because I backed Urban Shadows 2. I don't have Urban Shadows 1, right? Because I think the art I wasn't that impressed and whatever, but did Urban Shadows 2 and I kickstarted it. And
solid step forward, like you said, ton more. Like, if you look at the old book, like, there's not a lot of art in it.
Right. So what I've realized is it's still not done. So he just did a humongous Kickstarter, which he could just say, you know what, I really don't care about Urban Shadows. You know what I mean? Like, I really just do not care. I don't even care. Well, this is done. I don't care about anything. I'm going to go to Hawaii and live for the rest of my life. But he's not doing, he's like, Urban Shadows, we are still working on it. We're still doing editing. We're doing play tests. We see this isn't working. Like, he is as passionate, after, to me, I'd be like, I couldn't concentrate. I'd just be looking at Avatar, you know what I mean? But he's like, no, this Urban Shadows is going to be the best thing. He can make it. And it's like, well, that's a lot of integrity.
Yeah. No, the great team, great folks, like, they have a co-op model, which is like, I say that is because, like, I don't know many co-op models, especially now, that are as successful. And they were like an early first that made me go, man, I mean, this is why we're all doing it wrong. Like, everyone's making their own little game company, doing business as, or, single member at
Right.
LLC. And we're all out there, like, trying to do it on our own by ourselves. The first one, because who would work with us? And Magpie was like, I mean, albeit like they made a couple things, like each of them had their one thing first, but they're like, hey, how about you help me make my thing, and then I help you make your thing. Oh, and you're going to come help us? So yeah, and then we'll make your thing after you help us make our things. Oh yeah, and you want to help us too? And then they made money, and they could pay those people, and then that continued to strive. Now, you still need talent, right?
Yes.
You need acumen.
Right.
Like, Mark went to Harvard. It wasn't for business, but he went to Harvard. So, like, I'm like, when you talk about people like could have made more money outside of RPGs, like, he went to Harvard. He's got a degree from Harvard. So, and I think it's like bachelor's, like, it's not like his whatever, but I just was like, what? Are you kidding me? But, Marissa, his partner, and did all the art for, has been like this amazing art director from Bluebeard's Bride and obviously Seventh Sea, and continued on and on and on. But even that, like, for Avatar's success, it wasn't his first rodeo, because he had that $1.7 million Kickstarter that doesn't get all the credit for it because he was like the number 2. But he was the guy who John Wick went to as the business manager, as the Kickstarter manager, because John was like, I don't have the head for business. I just like.
Well, it became obvious afterwards.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's like, what have you done?
And he's gotten slack. I feel bad because but anybody who's a figure, like, you get slack. Like, he got slack for a couple different things that came out and happened. Like, they gave him a really hard time, or I'm sorry, they gave Magpie and John Wick a hard time when they made like the Asian islands expansion for Seventh Sea. That was a bit of an ordeal because they're like, where are the Asian people working on this? And I'm like, do you know who these people are? Like, they're like, believe me, if there is an issue there, they're really worried about it. Like, they're not sleeping at night because they're like, we need more Asian people working on this,
Right.
But I guess, I don't know. Sometimes you dig your own holes, right? Like, if you're a role model for something, you get more scrutiny. And
Well, it's weird. The thing is internet anger. And when I say internet, I mean
sure,
like what do people pick to be angry about? And then everybody flocks to that thing to be angry. You know what I mean? It's like
bandwagoning is real. Yeah.
because I remember somebody was writing up. This is a minor case, but somebody was writing about, some people are claiming that Tolkien's rolling his grave over, this new Lord of the Rings adaptation. He goes, but
Sure.
basically he's been rolling over in his grave since like 19.
Yeah, because how many
and,
adaptations? Yeah.
And I said, of all the people rotating in all their graves all across the world, I think the sound of him rolling is barely discernible. Like who cares? Who cares if J.R.R. Tolkien is upset or would be upset? Who cares? Why are we picking this to be upset about?
What's going on with all the natural disasters in this world? It's all the people rolling in their graves. Changing climate. Yeah.
But it's like you're upset about that, but there's bad things happening to good people right next door. You know what I mean? Like, why are you not angry about that? Or why are you choosing this to be your one thing to be angry about? And it's just like
your hill to die on. I don't know.
And he wasn't to that extreme, but I noticed that with politics and different things. Like, you're very upset with this particular business for this reason, but do you apply that same degree to every business? If not, why just this one business?
Yeah. We live in some crazy times, and it sucks to, try to have financial gain and stuff in these times, because I'm sure that you always feel that way, but there's, I obviously, being a person that talks to other people who are making games or publishing stuff, like I see and hear people say without saying sometimes, or even blatantly saying things like, should I be they, them? Should I, should I be bi? Should I, like, because people are looking for edges and ways to communicate and groups to bring to the table. And, to me, it's sickening, right? Like, if I won't make shit in 5e, I'm definitely not gonna like try to be someone I'm not. And I'm the guy who I feel like a lot of times I'm like, hey, if you're selling them, you gotta throw in the add-on, try to get the upcharge, like I'm the one who's usually trying to be like, hey, play to your advantages, don't be ashamed to sell yourself and your products. But like, I'm like, but come on, like and unfortunately, some people you see it works, and like that's the worst, because that tells other people like, do what I did, because it's still, you've probably heard this with some of the episodes, like the industry's small. Everyone still knows you. Well, I shouldn't say that anymore. It's probably gigantic now because of all the independent creators that nobody knows yet, but alarmingly growing fast because of Kickstarter and stuff. But for the people who feel like they still know everyone and it's small, people. So like when something start changing or happening, you're like, since when? It's kind of like
right.
And I'm not at all pointing at like LGBT, communities or something. I just mean in general, like it could be about anything that you're like, hey, I know you, like that's not you. And then they have thousands of more followers suddenly, and like people are paying attention and they're talking about all this stuff. And you're like, okay, so you're that person now. It's almost like Hollywood and marketing agents or something, right? Like you had a consultant and they said, which people like people with red hair and that smile a lot, it's like coaching or something.
I knew. So I work for a major company, and I worked in a factory, and one of the managers there, because of a change in climate and wanting things to be friendlier, they started implementing these personality tests. He thought he'd do well. He failed and was told, you will lose your job unless you change. He rewrote himself. He completely, now deep down inside was the same guy, probably, but he rewrote himself. I mean,
Wow.
I'm still, I think there are people that can rewrite themselves, but I can't. I mean, we all can change to a certain degree, but
Yeah.
a complete personality rewrite, I don't know.
I know, I feel like I had sometimes in my life had done some things, with the conversation we were just having. I know one of the things that sometimes bothers me is, sometimes I keep my mouth shut because I'm like, okay, I'm trying to sell stuff here.
Right.
Like I can't be involved. Like I said, one of the things that probably irks me more is how many people get involved. But like I said, kind of because it becomes their shtick and they rally for something. And then it's like those people are their audience that buys their stuff. And, if it's true and honest and original, more power to you. But if that's because, because I like I said, that stuff happens. Hey, a lot of people care about this right now. Maybe if you start talking about that a lot, you'll build the people who back your Kickstarter.
Yeah, but those people may be the type to eat you later.
Well, I'm sure they are, right? I'm sure it's the bandwagon, but like I said, some of those people, I'm like, they're still pretty damn successful right now.
Yeah, it's hard.
But you're right. You know what? One thing that she said there was very true. But then I look at the comments of some of these people, like, a Facebook ad or something, and there's a lot of people hating on them in those ads. So thankfully, for what it's worth, it might be more success, but there's also the level of like, I'm very thankful I don't have any hate.
Yes.
I really don't want that coming at me from this part of my life that I enjoy, my creative outlet, my hopefully giving something back to the RPG community that gave me so much, like these games, what they can do for people, the friendships they can make, the feelings of accomplishment, the life skills you can get to make you feel confident in your own life and other aspects outside of gaming that you got from here. Like one of the things that brought me back is remembering as more of an adult, I was really good at running games. Like at 15 and 16, I was a good game master. And now I did plenty of shit wrong. I made all kinds of mistakes. I did things that, would like, make me now be like, oh, I don't want to watch, like I would just be ashamed. Right. But there's growing pains. But when I look back and I go, some of the stuff that we did with my friends and, the games we had and the stories we made, I look back and I go, like, I contributed, I helped make that. And that was a thing later in life I could confidently look back and I'm like, role playing gave me that opportunity. Playing video games, yeah, maybe it helped me like hand-eye coordination, some story ideas and thoughts. But like stuff that I was able to do with my friends and the experiences we had, and the stuff that I had to create from whole cloth, whether it's improv or creativity or reading, that was stuff to look back and be like, I did that, and I only did that because I learned it from this, And maybe that helped me be a manager, or that helped me be a project manager or a writer, or, make choices.
Yeah, you're right. I think even running games, I mean, if you think about just the ability to think on your feet and having to do stuff, I know my new boss probably wonders about me, but but I think, you're right. I think that at least being if you're want to say if you want to be a good dungeon master, you learn to read the table.
Yeah.
I mean, as you learn to,
verbals,
and you may not still be the greatest, but a good GM, who person wants to be a good GM needs to be, somewhat empathetic.
Yeah.
And
working with people, you're making schedules, you're making, you're people who like, you learn how to talk to people, whether you're firing their character or like firing the player or hiring a player, or can you make it on Tuesday? I know you're always late. What's going on with that? You just all the, like you said, I give this person some spotlight here, but then these people are complaining about not getting no spotlight. So how do I judge? I mean,
right. Or this person's looking bored. Is he really bored? Maybe I need to, to tailor a little more to them, or afterwards you reanalyze how it went to think how you could do better.
It comes to management. I mean, in general, about all things, like talk about something you learned early, as game master can teach you how to be I give you all the management skills, at least,
Well, I think we've all, well, I say all, but I think in general, the role-playing games put us into a very social environment. I think because it's very narrow, it's not awkward. Like if I go and sit at a table of people I don't know and just expect to make conversation, I probably will be very, very introverted. You say, you know what? You guys are on a spaceship. You're playing this and this and this. You're on a mission. Go. We'll be clicking within minutes. Right?
Yeah.
And I think because of that narrowness, you don't have to worry about minutia. You're all together and you can work together. And I think that's what makes it work so well, is it's a defined social interaction between people. And I think the more we do that, I don't think we don't, in general, I don't think in America, we're more isolated. So I think the idea that we do these sorts of things it makes us a better as far as being more in touch with other people.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a very superficial thing.
I think about it now, especially, being older, like eventually you're not in school anymore and you start dropping off communities, social groups and stuff. And then as you find a career, well, then you get more steady with the same group of people. That if it's a place that may be smaller or an office setting, that you have less people interaction. But then like stuff like COVID, where if it forces you home, like you just keep less people. But like, a role-playing game is just another social outlet to keep you gaming with people, and especially if you go to conventions and stuff. I mean, that's where you can find diversity and people. Right. Because COVID has really reminded me so many times where I'm like, man, I'm sticking my foot in my mouth because I forgot how to talk to people. Because it's just like limited interaction.
You should do it with your son all day.
Well, that doesn't help either. Yeah, it's like I can sing you nursery rhymes all day, but I'm not even getting good interpersonal from TV, because it's like
I'm treating my coworker like my child or my wife. It's like, wait a minute.
I mean, if you were just in my head for a moment, all you hear is like Lightning McQueen,
Yeah, exactly.
Oh God.
Well, I think we're hitting the time-space continuum, Pete. Yeah. We're gonna have to do this again because there's a lot of things we didn't talk about.
We talked about how that could happen beforehand. That's great.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I will still say, as memorable as the game was, even talking afterwards was a great time. And
I'm really glad you stayed and that we got to have that chat,
Yeah, it was, in fact, I've shared stuff from that conversation. Yes, it's just like the model you use is just a lot of fascinating things because which we really didn't talk about, but the fact is you just said, you know what, I'm going to knock on a door, I'm going to get an IP, and I'm going to do a major game, I'm going to do this Kickstarter. But the idea was your model is also quite a bit different than my model, in that, I believe is you're using it to fund an offset print run.
Yeah. And
it's like, oh, that's a good way of thinking about, but you have to with what you're doing. But I just thought, anyway, there's a lot of interesting things that you have done.
I don't know how to not go big. I'm pretty good at it, but unfortunately, like my first game, where most people have been like, hey, just make the PDF for the book and go, drive through on. I was like, no, print runs so that you can have margins, so you can actually make some money back. And we're going to have this pretend box, which, I'm going to give you everything you could possibly want for a role-playing game in a box set. And here's the folding board with the index cards and the GM screen, the dice and the hardcover. And, and people are like, no, like, don't do this. This is all, like we were saying with Chew, it's like, it's your first thing. Don't do any of that shit. Like you don't know about shipping and fulfillment and product sourcing and, graphic design. And, it went great. And that game is pretty much all but sold out, which is going to force a second printing or something eventually here. We've been working on a variant, but anyway, that's a whole different thing. And like my second game just came out finally, because it took forever because of supply and demand. But Rest in Pieces, it's got a box set, a 2-color Jenga tower, it's decks of cards. It's gorgeous, but like I said, it's got a stacking sleeve, the coolest thing you'll ever make a Jenga tower, like, you know, all neat and clean and organized with.
Yeah.
I have the coolest one ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just how, and Chew's coming out with 2 books. It's got, you know, if you get the special edition, they're in a slipcase with holographic covers signed by the Chew comic creators. And the investigative corkboard is a quadfold board that's dry erase. And it looks like a corkboard when you fold it out. Chicken bucket dice that are after the Mother Cluckers brand in the book. You'll have this little white bucket, Mother Cluckers bucket, and you'll roll dice. The 6s are chicken legs, you know, so it's just, I just always go big. And there's some benefits, but like, it's a lot of time and effort, you know, and you just have to have the passion for it. If you're okay with it, you know, like you got to have some privilege, right? Because you got to have some capital or some money or be willing to spend it, you know. So,
well, I think with Chew, you definitely have to go. You can't go. I mean, you don't want to go too crazy, obviously, but you can't be.
I didn't do a box set for the first time.
Yeah. Yes.
I really was going to, but I pulled back on that.
Yeah, it's
gonna be the briefcase, you know, the investigative
yeah,
briefcase.
exactly.
We dropped that one.
Is there a stuff Pollo?
Yeah. There actually, I have a stuffed Pollo downstairs that we did not greenlight. It's really, really cool. But because it's merch and it's a hard argument for it to be game related, because of a couple other deals that are constantly always in the works, we just shelved it for the time being, just to make sure, because, you know, it was just kind of too questionable, and it wasn't ready. The prototype wasn't ready for the Kickstarter. So of course it'd make money, but it's just like, it wasn't necessary. And, you know,
well, that's the funny thing about IP. It's like,
you don't want to mess anything up for the IP either. Like, not that it wouldn't contractually be a problem for me, but like, the more successful the IP is, the more successful I am, you know? So it's,
right. But I know sometimes it's gotten kind of weird with like, you know, like large IPs where somebody has the, you know, like electronic gaming, but then is PDF electronic gaming, and it starts becoming things get kind of really convoluted. It's like, well, we have the rights to the board game and card games, but you know, how's it RPGs? And that's where a lot of times you'll see certain big IPs be broken up in weird ways, but it's just because somebody bought rights in a certain direction.
A lot of times if you reach out, if you hear anything, that's pretty much the second line of defense. That's the deal breaker, right? It's like, what's available, if they even care and respond, what's available and will it work, right? Like, it just may not even work. And if there's a TV or movie deal, that's a really weird one, because if there is, it may be screwed, but if there isn't, it may be screwed because of the perspective of having one, because the TV and movie deal is like, you know, what do they call
you don't want to foul it up because they sold off these rights, and whoever has the TV deal also has a publishing company, and they may also want to have these certain rights to go along with it.
And it's the big kahuna, right? So the person with the IP, they want the movie deal over everything, right? That's what you know, everyone's doing the locomotion, right? They want the movie deal or the big book deal or something, and anything else is like asking up to ask them, but they're like, but well, you know, maybe, but you know, I got to see if this happens or if this happens, because they might tell me no to you, and if I have you already, then I got to fight for you, and I don't want to fight for you because that's just chump change. But that's
exactly,
you know, that's the Scrooge McDuck money. So that's the whole game. If you can even get to it, you know, there's a long running history that like Harry Potter, anything Harry Potter is at least 50 grand. So if you can't walk up to them and say, I will give you 50 grand, no matter if it was like a keychain or a postcard or a role-playing game, it's just like, if it doesn't start with $50,000, I don't know if that's a year. It probably is a year, you know, like per year at least. But like, it's just not a non-starter. That's just where they start, like no matter what it is. So like, that's the reason why there's no role-playing game, is just because there's a couple board games, you know, like the
I heard J.K. Rowling has a thing against RPGs. I don't know if that's true or not.
Oh, it might be. I don't know that part. I don't know. I didn't try. I didn't reach out. I'm like, that's just the amount of money there. For most of us, will, you know, there's some reason to believe Avatar might have been that, you know, but I don't know if it would have been per year, you know. But
yeah, I think everybody's flabbergasted about that one.
Supposedly Marvel was back when we had that Marvel superheroes from Tracy Weiss Productions, or Margaret Weiss. They only did it for 2 years because they're like, okay, cool, we made a bunch of money, but we're not making so much money that we're going to pay $50,000 a year. And if you have a competitive license, that meant at year 2, you can't make any more. And if you have any left, you got to pulp them. So Judge Dredd is doing that right now on Drive-Thru. If you've seen it, that they're
Yeah, I listened to
UK
it.
Judge Dredd is,
They have a podcast. Ian World has a podcast. I don't know if you listen to that, but yeah,
they're done next month. So they got to buy it now, half off,
Yeah, I probably should start picking some of that up. I
It's
don't know.
weird though, because it's Drive-Thru, right? Like it's weird to like 50% off, all must go, but it's not printed yet. Like it's kind of, but you got to have them printed now because you can't have them printed later. It's a weird when it's print on demand. Like
Yeah, I
everything must
know.
go.
Yeah, it's a weird world. So we'll have to walk down that whole path, and because that's a very, I think, interesting story. I think you're the path for a small publisher doing it it's not a huge IP, but still it's a significant IP.
Mhm.
That's really, I find absolutely astounding. So we'll cover that next time, Pete.
You got it. This has been a blast. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, thank you. We've been trying for a while to get you on, but it's just been hard. But till next time, mister.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, obviously plug my stuff.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Feel free.
Yeah, if you're interested in what Pete Petrusha does, or Imagining Games, or Chew, you can go to imagininggames.com. You can find all the social media links there. And at the top, there's an announcement bar. You can click that and take you over to the pre-order page for Chew. Chew's taking pre-orders at least through April or May, probably, where you can still get those signed collector editions signed by the Chew creators themselves. That and like the hardcovers and stuff like the dice won't be mass produced as much. So, I mean, like those collector sets, they're done, right? I'm not getting any extras. Hardcovers are mostly done. The chicken bucket dice will probably be pretty close to whatever we get, so some things, don't wait, don't sleep on it, get it now, order it ahead of time, and you'll have it hopefully by the end of summer. So check that out. Rest in Pieces. If you want to play deadbeat roommates that are stuck sharing a pad with the Grim Reaper, it's a neat two-tone Jenga tower game. Plays like slacker sitcom sort of style play, but you can pick up and play in minutes. Have interesting characters with a dead end job, an odd hobby, and a deadly object that say a lot about who they are. Where you can give people a role-playing game experience in like an hour. So that's not something that most people can do, and for $40 and something you can always pull out at the drop of a hat, it's pretty ridiculous and fun. So
yeah, if I recall correctly, it's kind of has similar vibes to Chew as far as just the dark humor.
It's almost like the Cards Against Humanity role-playing game, because it's almost like a race for everyone to do the most vulgar, ridiculous things they can think because you're deadbeat roommates that live with the Grim Reaper, who are trying to one-up each other in a way so that they're not the one who dies, or that they maybe influence what happens before it all gets bad for them. It's fun and wild.
Cool. And I'll put everything in the show notes too. So if anybody wants the links. So anyway, thanks again, Pete.
Thanks, Jeff.